Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to invite you to join me for the next Legal Line show. It's actually two shows. We're very fortunate to have on the show Dr. Bill Cassidy. He's our United States Congressman for District 6. Dr. Cassidy is going to talk to us about the big issues that face our nation. He's also going to talk to us about the issues that face our nation internationally, the Arab Springs, all the conflict with Iran, the wars winding down, and we're also going to talk about the big issue of debt here in the United States and unemployment. So join us on the next Legal Lines with our United States Congressman, Dr. Bill Cassidy. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman for District 6, Dr. Bill Cassidy. Bill,
hey, Locke.
It's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Very much appreciate you coming in. I was kind of looking at, we've done a number of shows now and looking at all the issues we discuss. A lot of things have changed or been dealt with, and a lot of things are still on the table, aren't they?
They really are. The economy continues to be a huge issue and probably will be for some time. Our debt will continue to be a huge issue. Our goal is that it's not a huge issue for our children.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's a big problem, frankly, that the whole nation faces right now. Tell the folks a little bit about yourself real quick, just to kind of refresh memories, a little quick educational background, and then we'll dive into what you're doing in Congress.
I started off at Jefferson Terrace Elementary School at the beginning, and then went to Terra High School, graduated from Terra, went to LSU Medical School, go Tigers.
Amen.
And then after completing my residency, my wife, I'm a doctor, gastroenterologist. My wife is a surgeon, a breast cancer surgeon who retired a couple years ago. We met in California but moved back here 20 years ago. I still work at Earl K. Long Hospital teaching medical residents.
And you've done that for years and years and years?
Since I moved back. So last Tuesday I was seeing patients and teaching at Earl K. Long. But if you will, I entered politics at 3 years ago or 4 years ago, went to the state senate, and now have been U.S. Congressman for a term and a half.
It's like you're on a rocket. It's amazing. Tell the folks when you were elected and basically what the conditions were when you first got to Congress and what the conditions are now.
When I was first elected is when President Obama was first elected, so 3 years ago.
In fact, I remember you sat in and witnessed at a historic event when President Obama gave his inaugural address.
Yes, and in the 3 years since, the first term, the President had a majority in both the House and the Senate. That's when the President's health care bill was passed, as well as the
Dodd-Frank also?
Dodd-Frank, the stimulus package, etc. Frankly, the American people didn't like all that, and it didn't work, and the American people understood it hasn't worked, and so they voted out a Democratic Congress, and now we have at least a Republican House of Representatives.
All right, let's dive into that a little bit more in the sense that, as I understand it, when you first got there, basically the Republicans had absolutely no kind of sway in terms of what was going to happen. Democrats controlled the House, they controlled also the Senate, and of course we had President Obama. That's changed.
Correct. Now the Democrats still have the presidency, of course, President Obama, and they still have the Senate, but there's a Republican House. And so with that Republican House, we've been able to stop some things and do a couple of others, but there's been many other things that we would like to do that we've been unsuccessful at getting through the democratically controlled Senate, or obviously President Obama.
Now, Bill, explain to folks how the power, in essence, of Congress is divided, not between the Senate and the House and the President, but within the House where you are. Mm-hmm. You've got the Democrats and you've got the Republicans, and then there are committees and subcommittees, and they're assigned to tasks, as I understand it.
Yeah, so there will be a committee on Ways and Means, which basically covers taxes. A committee on Natural Resources, which would cover outer continental shelf drilling, for example.
Oil and gas.
Oil and gas. And then, well, not all oil and gas, just that which is on federal lands. And then there's Energy and Commerce, which is the committee upon which I serve, which has health care, the internet. It has oil and gas, which is not on federal lands. It has some role in nuclear energy. The committee I'm on really has the broadest jurisdiction. I love that committee. I'm on both healthcare as well as the environment and the economy and commerce, manufacturing, and trade.
And so you're one of the folks that really evaluates those issues and then make recommendations to the entire House, I guess.
Correct. So if it's a healthcare bill, for example, think Medicaid, then it is my subcommittee, the subcommittee that I serve on, that makes that consideration, then debates the bill, then passes it on to the House and hopefully the Senate.
And as I understand it, you're also part of the leadership now.
Well, there is a whip team, and I'm an assistant whip. So as we go,
so you walk around with a whip, or explain to the folks what it means.
So if the House leadership is going to have a bill, say to cut taxes, they want to make sure they can pass it before they bring it to the floor. And if there's concerns about the bill, they want to know what those concerns are before they bring it up.
So they can deal with it in advance, I guess.
Exactly. And so I have 4 or 5 people who I will go speak to saying, how are you going to vote on it? If you're going to vote no, why are you voting no? If you're undecided, what do you need to know more of?
Okay.
And then bring that back to leadership and then bring that back.
All right, well, let's shift gears a little bit. The absolute, what appears to be the #1 issue for our entire United States of America is jobs/economy. Let's talk about the job scene. I was reading this morning that it looks like more jobs were created in December. The unemployment rate has ticked down to, I think it said 8.4 or 8.5. Explain to the folks where we are.
Although we're very pleased that the jobless rate has gone down, there's now about 300,000 or so fewer people looking for work compared to when the recession started.
Let's explain to folks the significance of that, because I think folks, when they hear it, let's say it's 10%, okay? They figure 10% of everybody who could work can't get a job, but that's not it. Correct? I mean, you've indicated that the formula excludes folks who have quit looking for a job.
Correct.
And it excludes folks who are being called underemployed.
Correct.
Working part-time, or they're highly educated and they're flipping burgers somewhere.
So think about it. We have a lot of folks who have been trained in home construction, but the housing market has just plummeted. And so instead of somebody making whatever she or he would make, 20 bucks an hour, working at a home construction business, they may be working for $10 an hour someplace else. Now, what we really need to do is not only lower the unemployment rate, but also create better paying jobs. That's the challenge. Now, I have ideas about that, and we in Louisiana have had success doing so, but we need to take that success we've had and spread it across the country.
Bill, I have read that because of those exclusions in the formula they use to calculate the unemployment rate, that if you did include folks who quit looking for a job, and you only have to quit for 4 weeks, and then all of a sudden you're not contemplated, and then folks who are underemployed, the unemployment rate would be between 15 and 20%. Is that correct?
I'm not sure of the exact numbers, but I know the concept that you just said is correct. But like I'll also say, what really also concerns me as much as people not looking for work is that people who are not able to earn as much as they ordinarily should be able to. And that's just as much a problem, because clearly people have to pay their bills, they've got to put their children through school, they've got to make their house note, etc. Well,
and part of the problem that the nation is facing is because folks can't get employment or they're underemployed, the housing market has just been decimated.
Yeah, not necessarily in Louisiana. We're down a little bit, but some of the other states like California, Nevada, Florida, they really have had a major impact. That makes the nationwide numbers look worse. We in Louisiana, our housing market has not done quite as poorly as elsewhere.
I'd actually read that there were 12 million folks who own a home, and they owe more than the home is worth in this nation.
Yes. So that brings us back. How do we recreate prosperity? How do we create not just jobs, but good paying jobs with good benefits? House Republicans have sent 25 different bills to the Senate. 25? 25, designed to create more jobs. Not just regular, somehow positively impact the job market for typically blue collar workers. Because who's having the most problem with jobs right now are blue collar workers.
Sure.
And it's manufacturing, construction, and mining.
All right, let's continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines, our United States Congressman, Dr. Bill Cassidy. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. And I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman, Dr. Bill Cassidy. Bill, we were talking about the big problems that our nation is having with jobs. Tell the folks, I guess basically the plans being proposed by the Republican House to deal with the scenario versus the Democratic plan, and whether there's any shot at compromise or getting anything done.
Well, first, I'm a doctor, so I'd like to first diagnose the problem.
Okay, sounds good.
The problem is typically blue-collar men. And men who are blue-collar workers have traditionally been employed in manufacturing, construction, and mining.
Making something.
Making something, but also mining, whether oil and gas or coal. Now, the Republican proposals would all say, look to the private sector to create this. One good example is the Keystone XL project, which is an oil sands project in Canada, but it will employ Americans to build a pipeline. So you're going to have to make steel and take that steel to make steel pipes, and then take that steel pipe to make a pipeline.
Transport it.
So you have manufacturing and construction to bring that oil down to the Gulf Coast to our petrochemical plants, which
in Texas, I believe.
Texas, which will then employ people to manufacture this into value-added project.
So how many jobs are you hearing would be created by that particular pipeline?
By objective analysis, it would be 20,000 direct jobs and 100,000 indirect jobs.
Indirect meaning they would be providing sandwiches or transportation or somehow make it all come together.
Yeah, but think about it. My dad sold life insurance. He moved to Baton Rouge to sell life insurance to the men and women working at Exxon, or Esso as it was then called.
I remember.
And so if you will, there's a whole spinoff. People who sell pickup trucks sell more pickup trucks when there's a lot of construction activity.
So it just has basically not a trickle down, but it goes throughout the entire economy.
It's more than a ripple, it's a wave,
okay.
A very positive wave.
So where are we in that?
The president has two camps on his side. He has the trade unions, the steel workers, for example, who absolutely want this. They know it'll create jobs for the unions, the tradesmen, et cetera, who are underemployed right now.
The unions on the private sector have been decimated.
They have been. Now, on the other hand, his environmental base doesn't want it. The Canadians, by the way, say, listen, if you don't bring it to the Gulf Coast, we're going to build a pipeline to the Pacific Ocean and ship it to China.
I read that.
Now,
so they're going to sell their oil no matter what. The question is, are they going to sell it to their neighbor, or are they going to sell it to maybe a country who isn't so friendly to us?
Is it going to create jobs in the United States, or is it going to create jobs in China? And by the way, who has better environmental regulation? You know it's we, not
Absolutely,
they. So do you want to send it to be processed in a place with stronger environmental regulation or a place with less? So I don't quite understand where the environmentalists are coming from, except they just don't like oil and gas, period.
And Bill, in my reading, there really, as it relates to these type pipelines, have been very few spills. And so I'm not quite understanding what their concern is.
Well, the State Department was ready to sign off on both the environmental concerns as well as the diplomatic concerns about 3 months ago. And then the president's environmental base became active. There were some big donors that said they wouldn't donate to his campaign. There's activity around the White House, and the president has backed off and wants to postpone the decision until after the election.
Interesting.
Now this is seen in Washington as him trying to appease the environmentalists, but also his trade union base.
Now, I believe I read that as a result of this payroll tax that was going to be suspended for another year or so, that a provision was inserted in that legislation. Tell the folks about it.
Republicans, of course, are trying to drive this. We know the blue-collar workers are the one that need the work. And we don't want something government subsidized. We want something totally private sector.
No government money, none of our taxes going to build this pipeline.
In fact, because people are earning more money, they'll pay more taxes, not because you increase the rates, but because they're making more money.
So it's a win-win for everybody.
Win-win for everybody.
Well, so what's up?
Well, again, the president's environmental base strongly opposes. He needs that environmental base to get reelected. And so far he's put the hold on it. Republicans are trying to drive him to make a decision.
Now, in this legislation, did I read that there's a 60-day window now within which he has to say yes or no? He can't postpone it?
He has to say whether or not it's in the national security, our country's national security, to develop this in the United States as opposed to send it to Canada. Now, he'll try, and I understand now they're looking for a loophole to get out of that decision, but clearly this election is about how do you create more jobs for the American people, particularly blue-collar workers who have been most hurt by the recession.
Bill, let's talk about the effect of debt on our nation, on our state, and particularly on individuals. We are just spinning out of control. Explain to the folks where we are in this regard.
Yeah, right now 40% of everything that the federal government spends is borrowed from somebody.
China, other
India,
countries,
from ourselves,
individuals.
And so that means you just can't sustain a budget when 40% of what you spend. Under the president's budget, and I'm not telling anything that's partisan, I'm just showing what the president's budget is, that will increase over the next 10 years in a way which we cannot sustain.
Well, and as I understand it, for the first time in the history of this nation, we spent 100%, the government spent 100% of gross national product for the nation.
Well, that is our indebtedness, but that includes state and local governments, in fairness. That said, if we don't address the issue, our children and grandchildren will be not just burdened by debt, but crushed by debt. We can see what's happening in Greece, where if a country's indebtedness becomes too high, the economy just collapses beneath it.
Yeah, we don't need to guess what's going to happen. We've got multiple examples.
Yes.
We got Greece, Italy, Ireland, all these countries are on the edge.
Now, it's interesting that most of those countries ended up expanding the government so big, taxing so much to support the government, that the private sector wilted.
So growth of the economy came almost to a standstill.
Absolutely. You can't grow the economy by making government bigger.
Bill, as I understand the numbers, the national debt now is over $15 trillion. I think last time we spoke it was 14 or approaching 14. And that we're spending about 1.3 to 1.5 trillion every year. That is, the government is spending it. And then also, if you include unfunded liabilities, what's the number?
Oh, it's 60 trillion or something like that. So what folks don't realize is that like in 10 or 15 years, maybe 2024, if we don't change something, our entire federal tax receipts will go to the debt, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. There'll be nothing left over for roads, the military, for education. There'll be nothing left over for coastal conservation, for dredging out the Mississippi River so that our harbors can still go. Everything will be consumed by the debt, Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security.
Bill, our credit rating was reduced also for the first time in the history of this nation. We were the top rate, now we've been brought down a notch. What does that ultimately mean to the country?
Well, right now we can still borrow money at low interest rates, so it has not impacted that. On the other hand, what it is a clear signal that we need to get our financial house in order, because people who are looking from the outside in are pessimistic about our ability to do so. Part of our 2012 election as a country will be to decide how do we address not only jobs, but also our indebtedness.
Bill, I was reading, we're talking about the countries over in Europe that are on the, I guess, the cliff, so to speak, that the cost that they have to pay, that is the interest rate they have to pay to borrow money to fund their government, has approached 7%. And we're barely paying, what, 1%?
Yeah, we're about 1%, which means that people still think that the United States is the greatest country in the world in terms of the ability to do so. Our goal is to preserve that.
But if we don't change it soon, we're going to potentially have the same problem. We'll continue this on the next segment. Join us with Dr. Bill Cassidy. Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of myself, Sean Fagan, and Corey Ogeron, and our entire staff for letting us come into your homes for the last 10 years via Legal Lines. We hope that you've come to a greater understanding of how the law works and how the government works for you. So from all of us, thank you. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and again, very pleased to have on the show today our United States Congressman, Dr. Bill Cassidy. He's the Congressman for District 6. Bill, we were talking about the need of the United States to have an economy that's growing because we have this huge debt load. A lot of folks are out of work, been out of work for almost a year, a lot of folks. How do we deal with this? How do we make the economy of the United States grow?
Louisiana actually has lessons to teach the rest of the country. If you look right now in the Help Wanted ad in Northwest Louisiana, they're looking for workers, whether it is somebody with a commercial driver's license, somebody who can in a craft or something else, and it's all being driven by the development of the Haynesville Shale for oil and gas.
Huge discovery for us.
Huge discovery. Now you have to get that gas to where it can be processed. So not only are you extracting it, but you're also building the pipelines. And then they are expanding, you know, in the greater Baton Rouge area, there's about $2 billion worth of expansions already announced of manufacturing plants.
Just in Baton Rouge?
Well, Iberville,
in the area.
Ascension, West Baton Rouge, $2 billion in expansions announced over the last 2 years, with more announcements to come.
That's a lot of money.
A lot of money for construction workers and for the folks who are going to work there permanently. Now, it all started with increasing the amount of oil and gas we take out of the ground. So one thing we can teach in this state and other states to the rest of the country is that if you develop your natural resources, you create good jobs with good benefits for folks who right now are hurting. Not just for those who extract it, but for those who take it someplace to be further processed.
Bill, I've read that although now permits, deep water, and also shallow drilling are being issued, it's really, really slow as compared to pre-BP spill.
It is still not to where it was pre-BP, but that said, there has been increased job growth on the onshore hydraulic fracturing plays, including some that are about to begin in Livingston Parish, in St. Helena, in East and West Feliciana. So there's going to be some folks in this area who are going to benefit from the onshore oil and gas production.
Let's talk about the national security interests as it relates to our ability to provide for our own energy needs. That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. Now, let's go back to where we need to create jobs. Manufacturing is one place we need to increase job growth. One of the key costs for a manufacturing plant is energy cost. If you make energy really expensive, they can't afford to build things in the United States. If you produce a lot of your natural gas and they can use that natural gas to manufacture, you lower their input cost and you make our manufacturing plants more competitive with those with India and China.
In fact, I've read that in Louisiana we're doing fantastic in this regard. In fact, I had Dr. Lawrence Scott, who's an economist emeritus at LSU, indicate that because of that very cheap natural gas, we're really, frankly, very competitive and really selling a ton of stuff overseas now.
So our workers are paid more, but they're more productive. But you make up for the fact that they're paid more both by productivity, but by the fact that our fuel costs are lower. Now that is a competitive advantage we need to take full advantage of as we compete in the global economy.
Let's talk about the fact that, because it's fascinating to me, we've got Iran over in the Middle East who just threatened to put mines or eliminate the ability to transport oil through the Strait of Hormuz. Explain to the folks what that's about.
Yeah, most of the world oil still comes from the Middle East. About a fifth of the world oil goes through the Straits of Hormuz to get elsewhere.
Yeah, I've read between 20 and 40% of the oil
goes through there. So if Iran threatens to shut it down, then that threatens global oil supplies. Now there's good news that because of increased oil production in North America, the amount of oil that the United States imports from OPEC has gone from 66% of our supply about 5 or 6 years ago to 49% of our supply now.
It's got to keep going.
And it keeps going down. So one of the key things about developing our own energy resources are not just jobs, which is important enough, but also our energy security. The less dependent we are upon those countries that don't like us, the more secure our economy is going forward.
Because we're sending our money over to countries that don't necessarily like us and certainly don't always protect our interests. Also, if just the threat that the Iranian regime made oil prices go up, from what I've read, between $5 and $10 a barrel, and I've heard if they actually did do that, that is eliminate the ability to transport oil through there, it could be $200 a barrel. But that would shut us down.
But the power of our domestic oil and gas production is that right now we're producing so much oil and gas in North America that we're paying about $10 less per barrel than they are in Europe.
So the bottom line is we need to be drilling here, and it's creating jobs, it's creating tax revenues, it's expanding the economy, and it's protecting us from being manipulated by folks who don't like us.
And as we speak about how do we get out of our indebtedness, the more royalty paid by people producing oil and gas to state, local, and federal government, the more people earn, so they're paying more taxes, again, not because of higher rates, but because they're earning more, the easier it is to manage our indebtedness.
Let's talk about the Federal Reserve. It's kind of like a mysterious organization that you read and hear all kinds of things about. Explain to the folks what the Federal Reserve is and what it does.
The Federal Reserve, if you will, is the banker's bank. And so if this is the Federal Reserve, and here's your community bank, and here's JP Morgan, and here's Bank of America, they all deposit funds into the Fed. And if they need to borrow money from one to the other, they go through the Fed to help borrow that money. The Fed's the referee, if you will. And the Fed is supposed to manage money supply and make sure that inflation does not go so high. One of the controversies is that, one, until recently they didn't publish their deliberations. So, man, why won't you tell us what you're doing, sort of thing.
Right.
And secondly, it seems like they have moved beyond just managing money supply and inflation into actually attempting to manage the
unemployment,
global economy. So they're bailing out banks right now in Europe.
And I've also read that we are at a historical low where the Fed is allowing banks to borrow from each other at 0.25% or zero even. Remarkably cheap.
They are, but if the Fed raises the interest rate, that means that the amount the U.S. government has to pay on debt also goes up. So the Fed has to be aware that if they raise interest rates on commercial banks, the U.S. government also pays, which adds to our indebtedness.
So the bottom line is they're keeping it low so that the federal government, when it goes out and borrows money, they can still pay a lower rate.
Well, there are several reasons why they would want to, among them that, but also that homeowners, you can get a cheaper mortgage right now because
historical low.
Historical low because the Fed's keeping interest rates low, which means the commercial bank has to pay less to borrow, which means the person purchasing a mortgage pays less.
Now we have, and we'll talk about this more, but I've actually been reading that the Fed is contemplating somehow helping or help the Euro countries by providing funds to it. What are you hearing in that regard?
Yeah, and one of the controversies is they seem to be doing this not in an open fashion, in which case people might object. Why do we have involvement in European countries? But they're doing this through a series of currency swaps, which are frankly difficult to understand.
Yeah, it doesn't seem right that our country and our taxpayers are somehow providing loans to another nation or group of nations just to help them. We'll continue this on the next show. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines, our United States Congressman, Dr. Bill Cassidy. Thank you for being with us.